Hi there, my name is Dennis Hedrick and I'm a PhD student with Liberty University. I am excited to present my research proposal for discovering how federal agencies create servant leaders. Okay, the research question for the project is how do federal agencies create servant leaders? And the hypothesis is that agency leadership development programs that promote servant leadership development concepts will impact the presence of servant leader attributes. And in this case, we're going to have a dependent variable of servant leadership and the independent variable of agency leadership development programs. And methodology, which we discussed a little bit more in depth later, is the comparative case study analysis through focus groups. So we first start by defining servant leadership. Robert Greenleaf was a retired AT&T executive, and he coined the term servant leadership in the 1960s. And one of his final definitions of servant leadership was that servant leaders, they serve followers to become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely to become servants themselves without knowingly causing harm to anybody directly or indirectly. And we'll find that the caveat about causing harm to anybody directly or indirectly was a later addition, somewhat emphasizing Greenleaf's change to more emphasize ethical leadership as his conceptualization of servant leadership evolved. So Greenleaf is still the father of servant leadership and is cited in most of the studies surrounding servant leadership. So after Greenleaf's conceptualization, there wasn't a lot of academic research into the field until about the 1990s, in which initially most of the literature tries to compare it or suggests that it's an extension of transformational leadership, but eventually that idea departs into its own, where servant leadership becomes its own concept and is studied separately. One of the most recent definitions of servant leadership that we'll use here is that it is an other-oriented approach to leadership manifested through one-on-one prioritization of follower individual needs and interests and outward reorienting of the concern for self to others within the organization and the larger community. But we'll find that definition in and of itself doesn't provide enough of a conceptualization for empirical research, and thus we need to transfer to the attributes. And these attributes are defined by Leiden et al. In 2008 to form basis for his instrument. So these 7 attributes, as listed here, include emotional healing, creating value for the community, conceptual skills, empowering, helping subordinates grow and succeed, putting subordinates first, and behaving ethically. And now, looking through the list here, you'll notice that most of these attributes are concerned with others, specifically followers. Conceptual skills for number 3 do hint at a certain amount of competency, technical competency, and then managerial competency, but most of the others typically are focused on interactions with other people. And so initially, Leiden had formed a 28-item instrument, but later on was able to create a short form instrument of 7 items, which we're going to use here to establish our measurements. The difference between the items is a 28-item measurement would provide additional dimensions, better understanding, but for what we're doing here, using the 7-item instrument will be used to measure against another data source. So based upon the instrument, the Leiden had a Likert scale for these following questions here. My leader can tell if something work-related is going wrong. Number 2, my leader makes my career development a priority. Number 3, I would seek help from my leader if I had a personal problem. Number 4, my leader emphasizes the importance of giving back to the community. Number 5, my leader puts my best interest ahead of his or her own. Number 6, my leader gives me the freedom to handle difficult questions in the way that I feel is best. And number 7, my leader would not compromise ethical principles in order to achieve success. And here we've got the attributes associated with them, which will play an important role when we discuss the data. So on the basis of Leiden's instrument, the 7-item instrument, we've tried to put together a possible correlation against the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, which is conducted every year against employees for every agency within the federal government. So my proposed questions here are listed below, and they're correlated with the 7 attributes. I do want to make a note of question 45, which is an attempt to associate creating value for the community. There is no directly apparent question from the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey that is correlated with creating value for the community. I've injected this question here as a possible antecedent, a possible correlation with it, but my supervisor committed to a workforce representative of all segments of society doesn't appear to be directly correlated with creating value for the community. So as stated, so we're going to attempt to correlate these two instruments here. One way to handle this issue is by creating a survey that we're going to send out to 100 people, and they're going to have all 14 questions, the 14 questions from the previous 2 slides, and then conduct a confirmatory factor analysis to determine whether those questions do indeed correlate. As suggested earlier, at least the attribute of community may be difficult to correlate, but if we find correlations for the other 6 factors, my proposal would be to exclude that one attribute for determining, for measuring the dependent variable. So we're going to generate a servant leadership composite, and this composite is defined as a mean of the means. So for each category, we're going to create a mean of the responses based upon the questions that were identified earlier. So behaving ethically, conceptual skills, and the other categories are defined by the particular question in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. And we'll take a mean to generate, and then for each of those categories, and then the composite's simply going to be defined as the mean of all 7 means. As discussed earlier, there's potential that we may not be able to find a correlation for one of the attributes of Leiden's scale, and in that case, we would simply do the 6 existing attributes to measure and form this composite variable. At this point, we're going to have our dependent variable of servant leadership as measured through the servant leadership composite. So on the basis of that, we're going to select our cases. Our cases are, we're going to try to take an approach where we take 2 most similar cases and 2 most different cases. For the two most different cases, we're going to look at the cases where we have the highest composite score and the lowest composite score generally, subject to availability of participants, and then same thing for most similar composite scores. So we move on to our independent variable of leadership development. And leadership development is distinguished from leader development within literature. Leader development's a little bit more inward focused. You'll see Day's definition that it includes interpersonal self-awareness, emotional awareness, self-confidence, accurate self-image, self-regulation, self-control, trustworthiness, personal responsibility, adaptability, self-motivation, initiative, commitment, and optimism. On the other hand, leadership development is going to focus on social awareness, empathy, service orientation, political awareness, social skills, building bonds, team orientation, change catalyst, and conflict management. And while these differences exist in literature in some places, they're not strictly defined in others. For this study, we are not going to differentiate between the two. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a useful distinction due to the nature of the research design. We're going to measure leadership development through a series of focus group discussions. And so for each of these focus groups, they're going to be composed of the cases that we selected earlier. Those are going to be the four groups based upon two groups that are most similar and two groups that are most dissimilar. And within those groups, we're looking for a composition of 6 faculty members of the agency's Prominent Leadership Development School. And that's going to be specific for civilians. So to contrast, like for military agencies, we're looking to get responses for people that have attended the civilian schools versus uniform members, and then also 6 graduates of the school, and then each of those groups is going to attend sessions, 4 separate sessions in which we have 7 distinct questions, and those 7 distinct questions are also going to tie back to the attributes of servant leadership that we discussed earlier. But they'll be framed in such a way that targets how leadership development might have impacted those attributes. And so I've provided a sample of the questions and how they're going to be arranged across the sessions. In the left-hand column, you'll see the session number, followed by the question and the domain. These focus groups will be conducted in a manner to ensure that the participants are informed, they participate voluntarily, and that we maintain confidentiality. On the slide, I have put down a proposed agreement that will occur between the researcher and the participants to ensure that they're aware of their rights. One of my biggest concerns is to ensure that that everybody there is there voluntarily. Given that there'll have to be some collaboration with the schools, I don't necessarily want them to feel like they are coerced to be there if they're a member of the faculty. And also I want to assure that we maintain a high level of a confidentiality with the participants, and that's going to involve on this researcher's end to eliminate showing the names through the transcripts, and also hide that information throughout. I found 4 possible implications for this research. The first one is going to be to guide leadership development efforts in federal agencies. If federal agencies determine that they want to create agencies full of servant leaders, then they'll be able to possibly look at this research and take away aspects of the findings for tailoring their leadership development programs to produce those types of leaders. Next, we've established a role, a way to connect 2 instruments from Leiden's 7 question items and one that's available. So future research into servant leadership may be able to use those findings to further research. Next, we're also answering a call for research by Leiden in one of the articles, and we're also providing further literature in a US-based context, which may or may not be different than the current available literature, which is predominantly in Asia.